Hey there everyone! We gotta get back to fixing up this old Deutz 6006 so I can actually start using it. Now for those of you who didn't see the first video on this thing, in that one I did explain a little bit about why this is here and why I'm working on it, and I also showed you some of the things that are wrong with it. So for those who haven't seen that and want to check it out, I'm gonna leave a link for it down in the description. But the big main issue that I have with this thing is that the hydraulic lift on the rear is not working. So we got to get in there and see if we can get that stuff figured out, because it is pretty important for this machine in general and also for what I want to use this for. So in the last video of this, all I did to show you this problem was to lift these up and show you that it is in free float. And I told you that it was stuck in that setting. And a couple of you were saying that it's actually supposed to do that, and I agree that was a bad example. It didn't really explain much at all. So let me just try and show you a little bit more detailed what is going on with this whole lift situation back here. Well, before I get into that, I should just point out I'm not a farmer. I haven't done a whole lot of field work with these old machines, so I might explain this a little bit weird, but I'll do my best. Right, so as I just showed, the arms will just freely move up and down, but they are supposed to do that when this lever is all the way down in the bottom position. That's how you put this in free float. So if you're running some kind of implement that is just running on the ground, you want those arms to just be able to run up and down along with it. And that is the setting we have here. Now, obviously, when the engine is not running, there's no pressure on anything, so regardless of where you set that, they will pretty much just be in free float, at least to the point where you last set them. So if we were to raise them up, and they would come up a bit, they would stay in that position, but you could still lift them a little bit higher. And another thing that we could just address now that we are talking about stuff on the back of this tractor. So in the last video, I told you that it's missing part of the linkage back here, part of this 3-point link. So when you hook a tool up to this, you hook it to these two lower arms and a third link up here in the top, making it a 3-point hitch. Now, a couple of you were saying that I'm not actually missing anything. I'm supposed to hook it up to a bar in between these two sides here with all these slots in them. And that would work. You could just do it like that, but that's not actually how it's set up on this particular type of tractor. The point of these two plates is for the regular single point hitch. This whole thing down here, I'm not sure this is original, but all of the Deutz tractors I've seen here in Denmark have this type of hitch. So it may have been something that was added to the tractors that was shipped up here. I don't really know. But a lot of the German models don't have this thing. They have a hitch that is hooked onto these two plates, and you have these several holes so that you can move the whole thing up and down depending on what kind of wagon or how tall the thing you were hooking up to was. But the part that you're supposed to attach the top linkage of the 3-point hitch to was a big block that was sitting up here. Right in here it would have a hinge, and the top part of it would be hooked onto this big spring that is up here. So the whole hitching point was able to move a little bit back and forth. And the reason this top hitch was able to move a little bit is because it had a little control rod coming off the side running back to a lever over here. Let me see if I can show you. So it would come back to this lever on the side here, moving that back and forth along with that top linkage. And that is for something called the draft function. So over here we have this lever that is for moving the lift, but we have an extra little lever down here. If we pop that out and move it up into this position, we are in draft mode. So we'll go ahead and put this back into normal mode down there, and I'll also leave this main lever down here where it is supposed to be in free float. I'm going to fire up the engine, get some pressure in the system, and I will show you that there is no function in this rear lift. Oh, and some of you said that there might be some kind of a function where you could switch over the power from this rear lift to the external hydraulic outlets, but that doesn't seem to be the case on this tractor. This should be able to run all of it at the same time. There is no way to switch between one or the other. All right, so right now the lever is all the way down, but as I bring it up, the arm should come up along with it. But absolutely nothing is happening. It's not even trying. And just to show you that we do have hydraulic pressure, I can just lift one of those cylinders that are still mounted out in the front. Right, so we can see the hydraulic pressure is there, but it's just not operating the rear lift. So let's get this thing inside and see if we can figure out what's going on with that. I still gotta fix that. All right, so first of all, I should just say that I have, of course, done a little bit of research on this, looking through some manuals and stuff, but this is the first time I'm really digging into these hydraulics, so for whatever I say, just take it with a grain of salt, yeah. So the main valve that is controlling these rear lift arms, that is located right in here inside this housing. Actually, we can see it from the other side. So that valve is what is peeking out right here. This is the back side of it. And apparently that whole valve assembly, that is a part that does occasionally go bad on these things. Like if they are run without oil or they get dirt in them or stuff like this. This seems to be the most sensitive part. And the whole valve assembly, I'm not sure if that can be taken out and repaired, but the whole thing is still readily available and really not all that expensive. So if we don't find anything else obviously wrong, I'm thinking we might have to replace that valve. And I suppose we could just go over, so this entire valve in here that is controlling the rear lift arms. Out here we have two added valves for external hydraulics. They're not necessarily there. It doesn't have any external hydraulics. It's just this end piece out here that is bolted to the side of this housing. It is sending constant hydraulic pressure to all of this stuff at the same time. The pressure inlet is right here. That is coming from the pump on the engine. And the suction side for that pump is over here because this whole block is also the hydraulic reservoir. So it's sucking oil out there and up to the pump that way. Here we have the cap for the oil filter, the hydraulic oil filter. And this here is actually the back side of the big piston that is pushing those rear lift arms up and down. So if we take that out, we can take that inner piston assembly out as well. But before we take everything apart, let's just take this whole top cover off and have a look down inside of it and see if we can see if there's anything obviously wrong on the surface level. And for that, I'm gonna have to take this seat out. And now that I am taking this seat out, I think I'm gonna look out for a complete replacement for this thing. Because it's not just the cushions that are missing, the whole thing is also pretty wobbly, it has a lot of play in it, and also all of these adjustments are completely seized up and broken. So I might want to just replace the whole thing. By the way, this here is where you check the hydraulic oil level. I did check it and it is very low, but again, we do have pressure, so it's not low enough for that to be the main problem. Right, here we are. So as I mentioned, this is also the oil reservoir, so we do have a pool of oil sitting in here. But the oil pickup is down under there somewhere, so we are getting oil to the pump. Now the first thing I wanted to see down here was just to make sure that all these linkages and stuff here is actually connected to my levers on the outside. And they do seem to be in the way they're supposed to, so it's not just something that has fallen off on that. But before we can really see a whole lot more in here, I think we're gonna have to drain the oil out of this thing. But this oil doesn't exactly look fresh anyway, so it's probably for the better. Well, there's not exactly a drain plug or anything on this. I was thinking I could take off this pipe for the suction side for the pump, but it's just gonna run down the side of the tractor and make a terrible mess. So I think what I'm gonna do instead is just to take off the pressure side on the pump here and just simply let it pump itself dry. Might also make a mess doing it this way, but I guess we'll find out. All right, I'm just gonna fire it up. You let me know when it's empty. Ugh. Well, that oil looks terrible and almost watery thin. Good thing we're getting this out. Well, we did get a few liters out, but there's still quite a bit in here. But it did expose the suction side with the filter in it over here, so that's why the pump is just taking in air now. So I guess we'll just have to pump the rest out. Time to get out the big syringe. Yeah, that still looks terrible. Well, now we can finally see what's going on down here, which is not a whole lot, to be honest. What I do see is that we do have a little bit of metal-ish dirt down here at the bottom, which is, of course, never good, but on these hydraulics, the filter is after everything. It's on the return side, so it would have been eating some of that before it ends up in the filter. Actually, let's just take that filter out and see how that's looking. It actually looks pretty clean. I wonder if someone changed this along with those other filters. Well, we do have a good bit more of that nasty oil down in there. But there's not really a whole lot more we can see from here. We can see that the lever is pushing on that valve down in there, but I just don't believe that valve is sending any oil pressure over into this big cylinder. So I do believe I'm gonna have to go in and replace that valve down in there. And from what I've gathered, I think I have to take off all these external hydraulic valves just so I can gain access to the side of this block and get it out. There's not really a whole lot of room to get to things down in here. Actually, I might just do myself a favor by simply taking this whole block out of here. It's really not that big of a deal. I just have to disconnect the arms back here and the different hoses and pipes, and then it's just 6 bolts holding it down. That would make it much easier to get to everything, and it would make it a lot easier to clean the whole thing out as well. You know what? Let's do that. Let's get this thing out of here. Besides, I'm gonna want to have a look down in that rear axle anyway. Well, if that's how we're starting out, getting this whole thing off might be a bit of a project after all. That was already loose. There we go. just gonna take all these hoses out along with it, rather than try to undo them all in here. Also, there's a lot of weird homemade couplings and connections going on here. Might want to get rid of some of all this. But I do have to disconnect the hose running out to all this old front loader stuff. So I might actually just go and get rid of all this now that we're doing this anyway, because there's no reason to reconnect it when we mount this back up. See if this is loose now. Yes, that was it. There's not a whole lot of places to grab onto this thing, so we'll just give it a couple of these. That should work. I don't know how heavy this thing is, but it feels like a very heavy lump of steel. Yeah, that's secure enough. Putting this little bench to the test. All right, people, check this out. This is just my luck. So I was just fiddling around with this for a bit, and I swear I've been doing this several times before taking it apart, and also while taking it apart just now, where I've been fiddling around with this a bit, just, seeing if maybe things had worked itself loose, but no luck, it just would not work. But now you can actually hear what's going on in here. You can hear that? That's the cylinder just sucking air in and pushing it back out. And that's what it's supposed to do, because right now it is down in that free float position. But check this out. If I do this and lift up the handle, it stops. Actually, we might even be able to let it take some air in, close the valve, and now it's holding itself. It looks like this thing is working now. But, just to be sure, I really want to rig up some pressure to this thing while I have it here, just to confirm if it actually works now. I don't really have any easy way of putting hydraulic pressure on this, but really it should, in theory, work with just air pressure. It's obviously not going to be as strong, but it should be enough to see some movement in this stuff. Just gonna see if I can cobble together some kind of fitting here. I think this should do the trick. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's only for a test. Right, well, let's give this a try, I guess. So, it's just going straight in the return now, but that's what it's supposed to do because it is down in the free float. So, let's put the valve up here and see what happens. Look at that. It freaking works now. Come on. Well, I don't really know what to say about this. My best guess as to what's going on is that maybe some of all that gritty dirt that was in the oil and still in the bottom of this thing, Maybe some of that had been lodged inside this valve and just keeping it from shutting, or at least making it bind. But perhaps now that I drained all of that out, and also I've been banging this whole thing around, just getting it over here, it may just have flushed the dirt out of that valve and also freed it up. That's really my best guess as to how this is possible. So at first I was thinking, well, great, let's get it back together and get going. But the problem now is that I'm thinking I have to decide, now that I have this thing off anyway, do I keep tearing it down and spend a bunch of time and money replacing a bunch of seals and valves that might actually be all right? Or do I just go ahead and put this whole thing back together and just hope that it will keep working now? You know, while I think on that a little bit and weigh the ups and downs, let's go and look at some of the other stuff going on this machine. Well, that's the problem with taking these old things apart, is that you just find more problems. Want to have a look inside this rear axle? So, first of all, these are some enormous gears inside of this rear axle. But my oil in here is looking absolutely terrible. This is all milkshake. There is a lot of water in this. So much so that some of these parts actually have a rust on them. That's not ideal. So we definitely have to change the oil in this thing. Who knows, it might never even have been done throughout its lifetime. Now the oil is not really a big problem. I was going to change that anyway. The big problem is, and I don't know if I told you at some point, but the diff lock is not working. There's a pedal over here you step on and hold down to keep that differential locked, but it's not working and it feels like it's completely disconnected. I didn't think much of it at first because I don't think the diff lock is going to be super important for what I'm going to be doing with this tractor, but I see now that it might actually be a bit of a problem. So over here is the pedal for the diff lock, this arm coming down there, and it's actually in the actuated position. It was supposed to be up here, and you would step on it, and as long as you would hold it down, it would keep the diff locked and spring back up here. But it's just hanging there. And I can see now that it's because the end has broken off the shaft in here. See if I move the pedal, it's moving that. Now that was supposed to have a little lever on it that would attach to this shifter arm up here. So when you push the pedal down into the position that it is now, it would pull this over, locking the differential. But there is no doubt in my mind that the pieces we are missing over there, both the part that is broken off and the little linkage itself, is somewhere down in this sump. We gotta find those parts, because if these gears have to eat that, we can cause a whole lot of havoc in here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and drain all this nasty oil out of here, and we're gonna see if we can find that missing piece. I'm not sure if there is a cover or something we can take off the bottom, otherwise we're gonna have to see if we can find it from up here. Well, as I was saying about finding more problems, so I got down here to see if I had some covers on the bottom, and we do have one for the transmission right here, and we have another little cover for the rear axle right here. So with a bit of luck, the part I'm looking for is going to be sitting inside this cover. But while I was down here, I noticed that my entire rear hitch is falling off. This bolt is almost out, this one is loose, this bolt is missing, and this one is the only one that's actually holding this entire thing. Also, I'm missing a piece of the hitch itself back here. There was supposed to be a plate at the bottom holding it onto this bar in the back. But the whole bar is bent. Look at that. That's a heavy piece of steel to bend. This thing must have had some really heavy trailers put on it. So you know what? I might just want to take this entire thing off, get everything cleaned off and checked out, and make sure all the bolts are good, putting new ones in where needed, because the ones up here, they're also bent and falling out. And we might take this out and put it in the big press at my workplace to see if we can straighten out that rear bar as well. Yeah, let's get this thing off. Well, I thought I would just be able to take these two bolts out and drop the whole rear part of this hitch. But while this is still just a regular bolt, over here, someone put the wrong size nut on this and just welded it in. Now that's a real farmer fix, but that is going to be a little bit difficult to undo. So my next option is to take out this whole bar that is going through the whole thing. It's not completely rusted in place. I can turn it a little bit, but the problem is that this is also bent over here. So depending on how tight the tolerances are through there, it might also prove difficult to get that thing out. Oh yeah, and the piece I was talking about that I'm missing underneath this is to stop it from doing this. But actually everything about this hitch is just completely bent and mangled. Also, it's broken off several times before because there's a lot of old weld repairs on this thing as well. They must have driven around with some extremely heavy trailers on this thing. Or actually, it might not have been this tractor because all of this stuff, it doesn't look like this was always mounted on this particular tractor, especially the whole plate holding it underneath. You can see that that's been cut off with a torch and stuff, so this might have been taken off another tractor and just mounted onto this one. So who knows, it may have already been bent and mangled before this one started driving around with it. But even though I don't plan to drive around with extremely heavy stuff on this, I still think it's worth getting this thing off and getting it straightened out and make sure it's all attached properly, because if this thing breaks and falls off while we're pulling a trailer, that is quite the safety hazard. Oh no, why are all the safety pins stuck? It's going. There we go. Of all the places that wheel could be, anywhere but there, and we would have had room to get this out. Ah. It's probably going to fall this way and try to kill me. No. Wow. That went much better than expected. Everything about this is heavy. Right, there we go. That's a lot of dirt. That was barely hanging on. And same with that. Check out the absolute layer of dirt that is on this thing. That is pretty wild. But here is why I was saying this may have been from some other vehicle, because this whole part of the plate has just been cut off with a torch. And also, even though this entire thing is green, it's not exactly the same type of green that there is on the body of these Deutz tractors. This is a little bit darker. But now that I'm thinking a little bit more about it, this whole set was probably some kind of aftermarket part that you could purchase for these to bring the whole hitch a little lower down. As I mentioned, a lot of the ones that I've seen here in Denmark, they do have this type of hitch on them that is sitting below the rear axle, whereas that original German hitch that is mounted up between the two plates with all the holes in them, they sit much higher, and I suspect that wouldn't really work with a lot of the trailers that people were using here. So now I'm thinking that the reason they cut this with a torch was probably just to make room for that little cover that there is to get into the bottom end of the rear axle. Because if this was any longer, it would block the bolts on that thing. Anyway, it is getting a bit late, but I think I will load this up in my car so it is ready to take with me to work tomorrow. And we're gonna put it in the press and see if we can straighten it out a little bit. Right, so all of this has been bent in several directions. This main bar has been bent downwards. That has pulled these corners in, so this top part has bent upwards, and that has bent this bar as well. Or, of course, it's been hanging by this bar while something's been pressing down on that as well. So the whole thing really has been trying to pull itself apart. So I'm just gonna try and push it the opposite way, see if we can get it at least somewhat straight. Looks like it cracked the weld over here, but I was expecting something like that might happen. Well, just from my eyeball measurement, that is pretty straight. Good enough for me. But now that this part is actually straight, I can also see that we do have to push this plate down a little bit as well. This part is not super important. The hitch is not really supposed to touch this a whole lot, but it has bent this down because this part was so bent. So let's just push this a bit now that we're here. Well, this actually went much easier than I'd feared. This is definitely good enough for me. But yeah, we did crack this one weld over here, but this does look like an old repair weld. So we're just gonna grind this out and re-weld it. Well, now there's just a matter of this bar right here. But I can see this part, it actually got a little bit worse now that we did that. No, this definitely got more bent just now. All right, let's see if I can straighten this part up first. Look at that. Seriously, every one of these pins are just rusted in place. Oh yes. Nice. It's not perfect, but it sure is a lot better than it was before. Right, let's take this thing back home. Right, I think I'm gonna go and just weld up these parts that cracked right away, just so that I don't forget, because it might be a few days before I put this back together. Right. Well, it's not super pretty, but it should definitely do the trick. And somehow it's still better than what was on there before. So, now that we are cutting and welding, I might want to go and see if I can find something to make this little piece that is missing from the bottom of this. Not sure I have anything this thick, but I'm gonna see what I have and just make something work. It's not super important. It's not really load bearing. It's just keeping this from jumping upwards. Cool. That'll work just fine. So now all this stuff is ready to be put back together and be mounted up under there, but I do need a little bit of new hardware before we can do that. Right, so let's get back to draining out all of this nasty caramel oil in here. This stuff is just super thin. Doesn't even smell like gear oil. It's probably more water at this point. Now, the problem is I don't know how many thousands of liters are in this thing. From what I can see, it looks like the gearbox and the rear axle share the same oil, so it might be quite a lot. That does not look like gear oil. It's filling this up really fast. I might want to get another bucket. Is it seriously going to be more than that? Looks like it is. Seriously, we're going to need one more. This is just wild. Right. Well, we didn't make too much of a mess. See if there's a bit more in this. I suppose there's a reason they have two plugs on here. Yep. Well, that wasn't too bad. Right, so let's see, that is 40 and that is 15, and we have at least another 5 to 10 in there. So a good 60, 65 liters of this nice caramel stuff. Clearly oil was a little bit cheaper in the 70s. So I was about to say that now we could go fishing for that part that I'm missing, but we really don't have to do much fishing because it's right there. Look at that. Right in the middle of this big opening. I swear I didn't put it there. That's just where I found it. That is the little shift arm. Very nice. Also, I just gotta point out how lucky they were, whoever this happened to, because with this sitting right up in this corner, when that broke off, it would have done so right above these two gears. These two gears are meshing into each other when the tractor is driving forward. I mean, could you imagine if that had fallen down there and these two gears would try to eat this very hard steel? That would have been a disaster. But yeah, I guess to try and fix this, we have to get that little shaft out of there, which probably means taking off this pedal as well. Let's have a look at the backside of that. Well, once again, the best view I can give you guys is through the wheel. I don't know how much you can see. Otherwise, you'll just have to imagine that I'm doing something meaningful in here. Oh boy, this is tight. Ah, there we go. Yeah, that's the kind of bolt I imagined would be in there. Hopefully we can take that shaft out now. Alright, so now my dream was that I'd be able to take this little shaft out of here, if I can hold on to that somehow. Well, it's definitely letting go of the pedal now. Oh, it's not on the pedal anymore. It's practically free. Ah, here we go. Oh, that was an O-ring. Of course there's an O-ring. Nice. And the pedal is out. Alright, so here we got our 2 parts. Or 3, I suppose. There's a pedal as well, but nothing wrong with that, other than dirt. So, this thing is just supposed to sit in there like that. You can see it is just the welds that have just broken clean off. But actually, to be fair, they could have done full welds both at the bottom and on the top of this thing. I mean, even if the welds got a little bit close to where this would enter the housing, you could just grind that away and still have much more of a bond than just running these 2 on the sides, because there is a whole lot of torsional force on this little joint right here. But anyway, the good news is that this should be repairable fairly easy. Not sure if I could do such pretty welds, but I guess we'll have to just try it and see. And I am going to do what I just said. I'm just going to weld it all the way around. Just give it all the weld. I best make sure this thing goes back in exactly the same position. Right, well, that actually turned out pretty good. Alright, I'm sure that'll hold. Let's wrap this in and make it cool down nice and slow. But the next issue that I have is that I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to reinstall this thing while this big shifter fork is still here. So I think I'm going to have to take this out of here as well. So we're not quite done taking things apart. But you know those times where you set out to just fix one little thing, but then while you're there you may as well do this, and while you have that off you may as well do this? Well, that's exactly what happened here. This turned into many more projects than what I had in mind for this video, and I can tell it's getting pretty long, so I think we're going to have to split this one into several parts. Besides, right now I'm also at a point where I have to order a few things before I can really start putting stuff back together. So stay tuned, I guess, if you want to see all this stuff go back together and whether or not it even works. Thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you in the next one.